Yesterday, I crossed into Canada and I'm visiting my first Canadian town, Thunder Bay, on the north coast of Lake Superior. The name Thunder Bay is only 50 years old. That's pretty new when it comes to most city names.
Thunder Bay was originally two cities and two townships that all came together in
Amalgamation.
Thank you, future Jimmy. Combined Fort Williams, Port Arthur, and then two townships into one city, and they got to vote on the name of it. It was kind of cool that they had the ability to name their own city. It was actually pretty close.
When the cities decided to amalgamate, or politically merge, a vote was held on the city's new name in 1969. The final vote was Lakehead, 15,302, The Lakehead, 8,377, and Thunder Bay at 15,870. The names The Lakehead and Lakehead spoiled each other by a split vote, and Thunder Bay squeaked by with a plurality of just over 1% of the vote. The name Thunder Bay came from the geographical feature, the bay itself, which is a part of Lake Superior.
It was going to be called Lakehead originally because Lakehead was kind of the name that Canadians had because it was the farthest inland that you could get into the continent where you could have a port in Canada. This region was actually, a huge port at one point or another, especially in the late 19th and early 20th centuries, because the breadbasket of Canada, like their extension of the Great Plains and the wheat and corn and everything, as an export to be shipped out, had to be done through Thunder Bay, through this port. So it ended up having quite an economy here. It still definitely has its scene. I mean, there's a lot of industry here.
Of course, the history of Thunder Bay begins long before the city. Archaeological digs have yielded 9,000-year-old tools in the region. Paleo-Americans were the first humans to migrate into the area way back when the ice ages were still ending. Also, because the geography of the continent was always in flux, the shoreline of the young Lake Superior was farther inland. When we finally found evidence around the current shoreline, around 2,000 years ago, during the time of the Roman Empire across the Atlantic, Paleo-Americans were already living and trading here for thousands of years. The natives of this region are the Ojibwe, also known as the Chippewa. They called Lake Superior Gitchigami, meaning Great Water or Great Lake. As is always the story in North America, then came the white man. The French were the first to arrive in this area, as we discussed on the episode in the fur trade in Grand Portage. The French contact with the natives in the region was mostly economic. There was a French settlement here in Thunder Bay, along the Kaministiquia River, the same river that holds the Kakabeka Falls where I'm camping upstream. The French named Lake Superior Le Lac Supérieur. Translated to English, this means Upper Lake, due to its proximity to the other Great Lakes to its south. Eventually, the English would keep the anglicized version as Lake Superior, the word lake even coming first, like how the French would have put it. The French outpost here wasn't very successful. By the time it was up and running, there was a dip in the fur trade market that caused it to shut down. Then the British came. The 7 Years' War, or what was known as the French and Indian War in the Americas, ended with a British victory, and New France was ceded to the British Crown. The British conquest of New France brought a revitalization to the fur trade. Grand Portage to the south on the Pigeon River ended up seeing more traffic because of its strategic geographic location as a gateway to the height of land portage that we talked about back in episode 8. Grand Portage was a major hub for a reason. Then the US gained independence. The eastern half of North America was somewhat split in two, with the Great Lakes acting as a sort of boundary. The border around here wasn't quite settled for about half a century. Then, as we discussed on episode 6, on the Pork and Beans War between the US and Canada, the Webster-Ashburton Treaty finally settled the border here. Now that it was known that Grand Portage would belong to Washington, Canada worked on creating their own inland port. As the fur trade died down and Duluth began to grow to the south, Canada began to work on Port Arthur and Fort William. The twin settlements would establish an inland presence deep in the heart of North America at the Lakehead. Native Americans, as always, had to fit into the picture, and the Crown began negotiations with the natives to establish boundaries, of course at great cost to the indigenous populations of the area. There are a series of treaties, known as the Robinson Treaties, that were an effort by the Crown to negotiate land claims with the Ojibwe natives around the Great Lakes region. The Superior-Robinson Treaty created the Fort William First Nation, just south of Thunder Bay today. In a future episode, we'll get into how the Indigenous people of Canada have interacted with British monarchs, Parliament, and the Government of Canada. Thunder Bay didn't really take off until the Canadian Pacific Railway was built. This railroad was Canada's engineering equivalent of the U.S. Transcontinental Railroad, bringing Canadians from the eastern, more populated regions of the continent to the Great Plains of the interior and the west coast of Canada. The city thrived as a transshipment and grain handling port going into the 20th century. In the next episode, we'll get into how a wave of European immigration swept Canada during the Industrial Revolution, bringing with it an interesting change in the political landscape with the arrival of a unique demographic group, Finnish socialists and communists.
So it's the end of day 3. I got out of my comfort zone and went to a Canadian city, Thunder Bay, and walked around and basically took the city in. I'll be doing the same thing tomorrow. I experienced Canadian Tire, which is a big thing, and then some other Canadians I actually just ran into, Roger and Linda. They were real fun to talk to. They were just going for a walk from a neighboring camp and just came through and we talked quite a bit.
Jimmy, have a great trip in Canada. Have a great trip in Canada.
I actually got a couple hot dogs at a hot dog stand and they gave me their change back. I never really put any thought to this, but I don't know, do they have $1 and $2 bills or $1 bills even in Canadian currency? Because for a little lesson in Canadian currency, this is called the loonie because there's a loon on it. It's $1. And then the $2 is called the toonie. The one has a loon on it, so that's why they call it the loonie, and toonie just rhymes with loony. I've heard that the new $2 coin glows in the dark because it has northern lights on it. That's just coming out right now. I really hope I run into one. And then these girls at the border told me that the $100 bill smells like maple syrup. Both of them nodded and went, yeah, it does. I am gullible enough to actually think that. Maybe it does. And so it would be really cool if it did. Maybe I'll find a $100 bill and maybe it'll smell like maple syrup. I'll have to find out before I leave here. So I'll be going into Thunder Bay again tomorrow to continue on with this Great Lakes tour. By the way, it is 9:30 right now. 9:30 p.m. Bright blue sky up there. It's going to be like this for like another hour. I think the longest day of the year is tomorrow. Like the solstice, the summer solstice. So, oh my goodness. It keeps you awake. I should be going to sleep.